Good day, and welcome to another Marshall Forest conversation. My name is Stephen Parkus, and this is my good friend Logan Wooldridge. Logan, how you doing today?
I'm doing all right today. How about yourself, man? You doing good today?
Same, doing well, man, doing well. Lots to do today, so just plugging away.
Absolutely, man.
All right. So today we're going to be comparing body weight with weight exercises. Now, from my understanding, body weight would be like push-ups, sit-ups, maybe dips, and then weight exercises would be like, dumbbells, machines, barbells. Am I correct in that? Did I miss anything?
Absolutely. That would be a pretty good summation. I'd include like kettlebells, anything that really is a weight. Although we don't want to include all resistance equipment, as things like resistance bands are not weighted, and they're kind of a special category. But in general, yes, that is absolutely it. And for the body weight, it doesn't mean you have to have no equipment. You can set up a pull-up bar or gym rings so it doesn't mean no equipment always either.
Okay, got you. Yeah, I wouldn't have even thought of those two. So that's good. And then what is your personal philosophy when it comes to these two methods?
I believe in a hybridized approach. So I utilize both in my training. I believe in being prepared for whatever life can throw at me based on both what I've already been through and then, what could possibly happen. And to do that, I think it's important to utilize every method that you can because a lot of methods, especially ones that have been around for 100 plus years, like all the ones pretty much we've mentioned thus far, they all have proven benefits, but also certain weak spots. And a lot of them will fill in the other's weak spots if you mix them right. And, that's never experimental process for me, figuring out just the right amount of mixture. I think that's different for each person. And that's kind of, I believe, it kind of the edge of what we currently know scientifically as well, right? We don't know how to put it perfectly together for every single individual based exactly on their demands and limitations. So that's a process of experimentation, trial and error, and part of the joy of it too. But yeah, that's my philosophy to mix them because mixing them also brings all of the things I just mentioned, which to me are benefits. I get to experiment, which means have a little fun here and there. It also means I get to learn about myself and become more aware of what I'm capable of and what I'm not capable of. We all have certain things we're not as good at, both in the physical, intellectual, all of these. So yeah, that's my belief and philosophy on the matter.
Okay, okay. And do you believe one is more or involves more natural movement than the other?
Um, it all depends really on how you approach it, I think. You know, Anything can be unnatural, and it also depends on how you're defining natural as well, because you specified movement here, but in a natural sense, natural can mean many things. So we naturally use tools. Human beings do. That's how what make us kind of, if you will, an apex in the food chain rather than just another prey animal. We use tools. If we didn't, we don't have claws and teeth and, you know, all this like a lot of predators do. We use tools to make our claws and teeth, if you will. So using tools is kind of natural for us. At the same time, when you talk about natural movement, like I said, it's all about how are you utilizing these methods. Because, for instance, if you're just doing any kind of curls, that's not quite what I would consider a natural movement. I mean, all of these are obviously movements you're able to do, so they're natural in that sense. Um, but it's rare in your day-to-day natural living that you'd have to just curl something,
Right,
using only the bicep muscle.
right.
Um,
Okay.
so However, if you're doing deadlifts, we naturally have to pick things up off the ground. Clean and jerks where you're getting it from the ground all the way up over to your head, clean and press. And so all of these are utilizing weights, and you can go down that same route with body weight. Is like, are you utilizing natural movements or aren't you? And whether or not you want to, too, because there's nothing wrong with utilizing unnatural movements from time to time, bringing up weak points, or, depending on what your endeavors are for, it's perfectly fine. Bodybuilders use a lot of isolation workouts to specifically target certain muscles that they feel are smaller than they should be, without making the other muscles even bigger and thereby not really changing any proportion. So there are always reasons to utilize these different movements. What are you in it for, is a big factor in that. And if you're going for natural movements, then you can do that, as I've just given examples of with both of these methods. So you're fine to choose whatever method you find enjoyable. That's a big thing that we should all, as a community, fitness community, health community, be talking more about. It should be enjoyable. Not every day, nothing's enjoyable. Even your dream job wouldn't be enjoyable every day for the rest of your life, but more often than not, it's enjoyable. And even when it's not, you don't hate your entire existence just because you got to do this thing, hopefully.
Right, right, yeah.
So, yeah, that's what should really be talked more about, because you can make any of these methods work for you, especially if you're just looking to get healthier or even push your potential, but not for any kind of athletic or competitive endeavors. Even if you're doing it for personal purposes, like say you're a hunter, you want to be a better hunter, and part of your lack of ability is your physical abilities, you might want to train that up more. That's not a competition, though. That's just your life, you know?
Right.
So
Mm.
use what works for you then. There's no reason you would have to go down a powerlifting or a bodybuilding or any of those. Use what works for you.
What factors should someone consider when choosing between body weight or weight training or combining the two together?
Number one, as we were just talking about, I would say is your enjoyment of them. And matched or close second to that is your injury likelihood with each one. Certain people are unfortunately more genetically have a higher genetic predisposition to injury, meaning they're more likely to get injured. They just have weaker connective tissue, things of this nature. Doesn't mean you can't train. In most cases, again, go to a doctor, get medical clearance, make sure it's okay. Most of us can in some way still train. We just have to be more careful or choose the method that isn't going to interfere in the way that we are likely to get injured.
Okay. Okay. Gotcha.
Um, and then other than that, I would say let's say you enjoy both and your injury likelihood is equal on both, or just you don't seem to be likely to get injured, period. I would say do both, and throughout your training career, if you will, I think you'll find that you'll vary it up between programs. You can have more body weight when you're feeling like you want to do more body weight. You can have more weight training when you want to do more weight training. At the same time, if you want to go more capability centric, then, which is a way I honestly like to do it, then you can spend some time focusing on strength. Weights will contribute more to all out max strength, I think. But if you're talking, endurance style strength, like work capacity strength, that you might get equal benefits out of both, depending on how you're doing them. So you can choose body weight if you want to. Yeah. At the same time, if you're trying to build muscle, for instance, you probably want to grab weights. Weights do tend to trigger more of the growth stimulus, but that's a whole nother discussion. So,
Okay. Okay. And to kind of jump backwards a little bit, to the muscle isolation, is it easier to isolate certain muscles with weights than with a body weight?
In general, yes. And that is because, again, your body weight is going to be you just moving your body. We usually, to move our own body, we have to move more of our body, right? If I want to move something around, I can just grab it and boom, do this with just one arm if I really focused and wanted to,
Right.
right? But if I wanted to move myself, say I'm holding something and I wanted to keep holding it, but by holding it, move me a certain way, it's going to take more of my musculature to move me in that way than to move something else in that.
Okay.
You get what I'm saying?
Yep.
Again, generally speaking, there are always exceptions to every rule, everything really. So
Okay. Okay. And how does balance and control factor in when lifting, when moving yourself versus lifting a barbell, say?
well, because you're just moving yourself, you're going to build more spatial awareness, more body awareness, you know, and so that has a higher natural ability, I think, to connect you with yourself, the body weight training. However, the weight training definitely it's easier to isolate muscles and such. So if you want to work on connection with a specific part of your body, it can be easier to do it with weights. However, there are certain parts of the body, such as your lats, that without certain special equipment, it can be hard to isolate with weight. So your lats are easier to isolate with like a pull-up. So it all depends.
Okay. Okay. I'm seeing the importance of having a knowledgeable coach or professional when kind of talking about and working through some of these things because this a lot of this is stuff I wouldn't even consider or think of. So yeah, that's awesome. Very cool. And then how can body weight training make fitness more accessible for people at home or even on the go?
Well, it for people on the go, it in itself, I think, is more mobile, right? Now I will say today there are gyms all over the place in comparison with almost, if not any other time in history, right?
Yep.
And I feel pretty confident saying that. I've studied a fair amount of history, and if you read the blog, you'll find I've particularly started writing more historical related blog posts. So I have a decent idea of how that has been. And, other than like ancient Greece and Rome, gymnasium places to train with any kind of apparatus are pretty rare throughout history, unless you're in the military and stuff, and that's not the same kind of training. Sometimes they'll utilize some of the same methods, but there's a lot more to it than just general physical training.
Right, right. Okay, okay.
Yeah, so I think even though, however, there are more gyms around today, it's still more mobile to use just your own body. You can do that anywhere. I don't even have to go to the gym, and who knows how close the closest gym is. Even if you're in a city that has, say, 10 gyms, big enough city, and with enough traffic, it still might take you 30 minutes to an hour to get to the gym. That's just to get there.
Right.
Like, so
Then
it's
are
a
you going to
lot
get
more.
in? Do you have to pay a membership? All these
And
things.
then
Yeah.
at the same time, if you're out in the country, say, there's still few gyms out in country places like where I live, for instance. Why I'm glad I have all my own weights. I'd have to go 45 minutes just to get to the closest gym. And that's not due to traffic. That's just almost unimpeded travel time.
Right.
How little traffic there is out here, and it still take me 45 minutes. So
Right. Yeah. Mm. And then are there specific goals like fat loss, muscle gain, endurance that each style supports better than the other?
definitely I would say they can support different benefits more, such as muscle gain often is easier with weight training. Again, muscle gain specifically, meaning you're building bigger muscles, not just getting in shape. That's why bodybuilders generally lift weights. They're not out there doing all kinds of crazy calisthenic movements. At the same time, that body control and awareness is probably, again, all around, not in an isolated, targeted sense, is probably going to improve much more quickly and all around with body weight movements.
Okay. And then let's talk about some of the risks that are associated with both of these methods or concerns, things to be aware of, either one.
They're kind of, again, this is where that weak spots come into play, different ones having different weak spots, right? And by hybridizing the training, you can really lower your risk, I think, if you approach it wisely, and meaning you slowly build up, then they can cover each other's weak spots because overuse injuries are more common. Things like tendonitis and such, which happen most often when you overuse a particular joint over and over and over again in a specific way, especially under stress.
Hmm.
Uh, and that happens a lot more with bodyweight training because once you've adapted to it, it's easier to do a whole lot of reps. Whereas things like torn muscles and pulled tendons are more likely with lifting weights because you're putting more external strain on it and it's easier to do it in completely unnatural and unsafe ways than it is with your body, which is often just not flexible enough to do things in unsafe positions, especially if you're a generally healthy person that's been medically cleared and you're following the guidance of a trainer. These are more likely to happen with these methods. However, it's also important to note that that doesn't mean they are exclusive, right? People do get, completely ripped off muscles doing crazy calisthenics. People can get tendonitis and such from too much lifting. So it's not completely exclusive. And it also depends on how hard you're pushing yourself and how well your form is and all these other factors, of course. So please don't think it's like, oh, if I lift weights, I'm going to pull a muscle someday. It's guaranteed. It's not guaranteed. It can
Right,
happen. It's
right.
important to note that it could happen. So don't go in thinking like, oh, well, this is only going to get me so I can just throw things around however I want. That's the healthy level of caution to take to know that, okay, I should be doing these with proper form and everything. Either do your own research, get a trainer, what have you, to make sure you're doing them safely. And as long as you are, it's going to help you. It's going to be good for you. But if you're just throwing things all over the place, whether you're doing body weight or weight training, you're likely to get yourself messed up.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes sense. I mean, I would guess, especially depending on the level of challenge you're like putting yourself into or are willing to undergo, it gets more and more serious. If I'm willing to just try and lift the heaviest thing I can and I'm just throwing weights on there, yeah, I'm gonna hurt myself.
Absolutely.
And then is it true that weight training bulks you, while body weight would be more of a toning exercise?
I would argue that what's more important when it comes to bulking or toning is really your nutrition. That's got to be in place. It doesn't matter what kind of training you're doing. If you want to gain weight, you got to eat. If you want to lose weight, you got to eat less. And there is a certain range you should be in all this. This is where nutrition coaches and dietitians and such can help. But the body weight training is able to kind of tone condition more, what I think people mean anyways when they're saying tone, right? Because it's really not a like technical term. What do you mean by tone? Like that can mean a lot of different things. I get your general idea, but what exactly do you mean, right? But bulking or gaining, I assume in the case of bulking here, you mean gaining muscle, particularly, because people have done plenty of people, especially in the old days, used to do dirty bulks, right? You gain just as much fat as muscle, maybe even more. But anywho, the bulking of muscle, the weight muscle gain, if you will, is generally easier with weight training, but it also depends on how you're doing the weight training. You ever notice you might notice a lot of strength athletes are not hugely muscle dudes. They might be bigger dudes, but they're not like a bodybuilder who comes out with like 40-inch fucking arms. You know what I mean? Don't get me wrong, they're not small dudes by any means. And in fact, as our understanding of how nutritional science works and such, they're getting actually bodybuilders and other types of weight trainers are getting closer and closer. I don't think they'll ever size wise be the same, but the general shape is getting the same, the V taper and stuff like that, because we're all realizing how in all sports, healthier nutrition supports better performance. But they don't get as big as bodybuilders. Why? Because even within weight training in general, there is a way you can train to specifically encourage even more muscle growth. And then, of course, you can talk about drugs and, our nutrition, of course, like I already mentioned, and all that. But your nutrition needs to be in place. Once that is, the type of training you're doing can be considered like you're asking. And then I would argue weight training is probably a little better, but also don't forget about that enjoyment factor. If you hate weight training, you're not going to stick with it. It ain't going to matter. But if you can, weight training and the weight training done in a certain rep range with a certain amount of rest time, with only a certain amount of sets, with certain muscle frequency stimulations, and all of this, both in the daily as well as month to month, week to week, day to day, all can be programmed in such a way that it encourages muscle gain quicker. Yes.
Okay. Okay. No offense to anybody that's going this route. It's mainly just a curiosity question, but it seems to me like once you get to a certain point with the actual muscle growth itself, it seems like depending on your goals and lifestyle, it would become kind of less effective the more you're bulking up, right? Am I right?
I think you're right. But I just want to clarify here what your meaning is. Once you gain a certain amount of muscle, how much muscle you can continue to gain will start to slow down.
No, more so in like just action. You know what I mean? Like being able to move and just kind of go about my day. It gets kind of more and more difficult the more bulky your muscles are getting, right?
It can certainly, you gotta be able to walk around your house and move around without knocking into shit. Or at least it's nice to be able to. And then of course there's the comfort when you're asleep and such. How well can you sleep on your side when you got huge broad shoulders? So yeah, there's a lot of things that maybe you don't think about. And at the same time, there is a point where, again, we'll refer to bodybuilders versus strength athletes. The top power builders, strongmen, and all these, they're not as big as your top bodybuilders, but they will outlift them pound for pound any day of the motherfucking week, right? So there's a point where muscle size only has so much association with actual strength potential.
Okay.
It is not my bigger muscles will be stronger just automatically.
Uh,
Not a, you can train smaller muscles to be stronger than bigger muscles.
okay. Wow. Yeah, I didn't know that. That's interesting. I always equated, I mean, not necessarily strength, but you see somebody that's bigger and you think, oh, that guy's rip a hole in the wall. Huh.
I mean, don't get you wrong. I could almost guarantee you he's stronger than the average Joe who's never gone to a gym before, of course.
Right.
But like again, you put him up against like the Eddie Hall, Brian Shaw, any of those top world class, like they've held the trophy of strongest man in whatever year, hold records
Right.
in lifting and shit. Like they will be stronger than your top bodybuilder, even though the top bodybuilder is probably bigger muscle wise. It's actually funny. You can look up pictures of some of these guys standing next to bodybuilders height wise. The power lifters are often way taller than the bodybuilders. But yeah,
Okay.
almost like there might be something about like your skeletal structure being bigger that offers more strength potential, but pure muscle size, no. And that's just totally just off the cuff theory there, based on what I'm thinking right now. But yeah.
Oh, no, no. Yeah, that's wild. And so for you, what are some of the benefits you believe come from your integration of both these methods into your fitness routines?
Well, first, I want to talk about the fact that there's a sacrifice you would have to face. I'm never gonna be, unless some kind of magical miracle happens, I'm never gonna be as strong as a top strength athlete. I'm just not. I haven't put that much time into pure strength work. I'm never going to be as big as I could potentially be if I only trained bodybuilding style, right? And so on and so forth. I could rail off every single, because I have focused on more functional things. I have spent some time in these other in strength and some time in bodybuilding style to help build certain mind muscle connections and such, and to bring up weak points and things. I have spent some time working on endurance and this and that, but my point being, I haven't spent my whole career doing any one of these, so I'm never going to be as far in any one as, or nobody could be doing a hybrid style as you would be if you did just one, right? However, to me, what that means is in life, in the day to day, I will be more capable than any athlete who is training just for their sport, right? Because I could deadlift 400 pounds. Might only be able to do it once or twice, as opposed to the 8 times a strength dude could, but I can lift it once or twice. And then I can rest 2 minutes and then get up and keep working the rest of the day. I'm not exhausted now because I just did my training. I have a decent amount of speed. I have a decent amount of stability. I'm able to also keep my posture in check to make sure I'm not getting such bad muscle imbalances that I'm getting certain pains and tweaks here and there in general. It allows me to work on things like footwork and this and that, which is important to me given my foundation is martial arts. I've been studying that since I was a kid. So it's important to me that I'm able to always train my martial arts on top of whatever kind of weight and or body weight training that I'm doing. So all of this comes into play for the benefits of my side of training in my eyes. And it's why I do it. It's a slower process, again, because I'm not jumping in any one area, and because knowing how all of this works, I know that no matter how far I go, let's say, for instance, I just came off an almost 2-year run of focusing on strength because I hadn't focused on strength in almost my entire, specifically, obviously I had gotten stronger, but I hadn't pushed just my strength max until 2 years ago, and I spent the last 2 years doing it. Now I'm coming off it. I know my max strength is going to probably drop a little bit, at least for a little while, before it starts building slowly back up, but it won't build up like it did before. And it's going to drop because now I'm working on my muscular endurance, or my work capacity, if you will. So that's going to start to rise. My strength will dip a little bit to wherever, right? I'm not going to give a certain amount. It'll dip. And then when it dips to wherever it dips to, it'll start to build up slow. Hopefully, anyways, it'll build up slow, real slow, especially because I've already pushed it so far, but my work capacity can continue to grow much more. And at the same time, with too long a continuous period focusing on a particular type of stimulus, such as strength, it gets less effective in your training. So to switch it up and give that stimulus time to resensitize is important too.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, it seems like we could do about three more videos on some of these different topics. That's fascinating. It makes sense. It makes total sense. That's awesome, man. Really cool. All right, so we're winding down for time here, but is there anything else you'd like to share before we wrap up?
I just would encourage everybody to give both of these a chance. And by a chance, I mean 2 weeks to a month. See how you feel. At first, it's going to suck, which is why you got to give it 2 weeks to a month. I prefer a month. Because by the end of a month, you'll hopefully stop being quite as sore as you were in the beginning of the month.
No doubt. Okay.
And then
Yeah.
see how you feel. See if one you like more than the other. See if you just like were able to adapt better to one or the other. Gain benefits more from one rather than the other. All this. Just give yourself a chance.
That's it. Start small, but start.
Absolutely.
All right. Yeah, make sure you check us out at themarshallforest.com and on socials. All the links are in our bio on our YouTube page. And we are constantly releasing new material, videos, audio podcasts, blog posts, and services with more features to come. And wishing you progress on your path and good health throughout your day. This is another Marshall Forest conversation out.